When I was little, my family used to send me every summer for 2 weeks to my grandfather's place in eastern Ohio. The house was on a 55-acre property that was mostly forest. Honestly, it felt more like woods than a farm. My cousin Joni came on a different schedule because our families wanted to give my grandfather a break between visits. I always went during the last 2 weeks of June. He always went during the first 2 weeks of July. The house had 3 floors. The third floor was just one room. It used to be my father's room, and I slept there. The ceiling sloped down on both sides, and there was a single window facing the backyard and the forest. My grandparents went to bed early, usually before 9:30 p.m. My parents told me that wandering around after they went to sleep and disturbing them would be disrespectful to these old people. So I stayed in my room. But I never actually slept. I had a small flashlight. I would read books and comic books and sometimes play video games. There really wasn't much else to do. The first summer passed without incident, but during the second summer I spent there, I started to notice strange things. One night while I was reading in my room, I heard footsteps on the stairs leading up to the attic. It sounded like someone moving slowly, trying not to make any noise. I watched as the doorknob turned and the door opened about 2 inches. The moment I saw the door open, I turned off my light and pretended to be asleep. Honestly, I thought it was my grandmother coming to check on me, and I knew very well that if she saw me awake, she would scold me. She had done that before. But after that, I heard nothing. No retreating footsteps and no sound of the door closing. I forced myself to fall asleep, assuming that my grandmother had either left or was somehow still watching me for whatever reason. The next morning I told my grandfather about the footsteps. He said the house was old and made noises and that sometimes mice and raccoons got into the walls. I found that explanation strange because I was quite sure I had seen the doorknob turn, but I didn't say that the footsteps were too soft to be his. So I just assumed it was my grandmother, even though she didn't seem to know anything about it. 4 nights later, I woke up. Or at least, I thought I woke up, because my bed was shaking. Someone was standing at the foot of my bed. It was dark, but I could see the silhouette. I couldn't tell whether it was my grandfather or my grandmother, but it still terrified me. I closed my eyes and silently began counting. 1, 2, 3, 50, 80, 100. When I cracked my eyes open, I was alone in the room. It was gone. I couldn't understand why these old people would come to check on me in the middle of the night. I figured I must have had a nightmare. At least, that's what I tried to convince myself of. The next morning when I woke up, my closet door was open, even though I was sure I had closed it. That made me question whether I had really been asleep at all. As stupid as it sounds, I started to suspect that my grandmother was watching me while I slept. It was the only explanation that made sense to me. I thought that old people couldn't always control their minds very well. It was frightening, but I was too afraid of upsetting them or being disrespectful to mention it again to my grandparents. Similar things happened a few more times that week and the following week. And when it was finally time to go home, I felt relieved. When my mother came to pick me up, I told her everything. She laughed and said it was impossible to get my grandmother out of bed after she fell asleep. Then she told me I had an active imagination and that old houses were creepy. She also said that Joni never complained about anything while he was there. That made me feel like maybe I really had just imagined everything. The next summer I went back, and the same things happened. I never actually saw my grandmother's face, but I knew it was her. I started going to bed much earlier to reduce the risk of something creepy happening, though it didn't really help. Years passed. After I reached a certain age, my family stopped sending me to my grandfather's farm. I don't know why, but I remember feeling a strange sense of relief. My grandfather and grandmother both passed away while I was in college, just 2 weeks apart. The funeral was one of the most depressing things I've ever experienced. Besides the sadness, I also had to talk to many relatives I hadn't seen in years, which I didn't enjoy at all. One of those relatives was Johnny. Even though we were about the same age, we never really interacted much. We had nothing in common. The only thing we truly shared was our time at the farm. So, not knowing what else to talk about, and thinking that my grandparents would be a reasonable topic, I brought it up. I told him everything I had experienced. The footsteps, the silhouette in my room, the closet door. I even told him that I had suspected our grandmother. I expected him to laugh, or maybe agree with me, but I was wrong. With a blank expression, he said something I will never forget. "That's nothing. That thing used to touch me." In horror, I listened as he described experiences that were categorically worse than mine. He said the same figure would stand at the foot of his bed every few nights, but unlike with me, it didn't just watch him. He could feel the bed sink as if it were sitting down. Then he would feel fingers on his face, tracing his features. Sometimes it would take his hand and just wait. He said he kept his eyes shut and stayed frozen until it left. I asked him how he knew it wasn't our grandfather or grandmother. As if it were obvious, he said he could tell because the thing that touched him had rough, itchy hands, nothing like the hands of our grandparents. I stared at him in shock. I truly couldn't believe what he was telling me. I asked why he had never said anything about this before. He said he hadn't kept it a secret. He told his mother, but she didn't take him seriously. He even got scolded for bringing it up again. So he stopped talking about it and convinced himself that as long as he kept his eyes closed and didn't move, everything would be fine. Hearing him describe it was absolutely horrifying. Not only did it confirm everything I had experienced, but it also made it much worse. Johnny and I never talked about it again after that. I think we both wanted to leave our shared nightmare behind with the rest of our childhood. But if it wasn't my grandmother coming into the room at night, then what was it? The fact that my cousin described it as a thing still chills me. But is it really any better to think it was a human? That would mean someone had been secretly living in my grandparents' house for years without them knowing. I don't know which thought is worse,